The Ones Who Live was a highly anticipated show that was going to bring back Rick after several years of him not being on screen anymore, and through that, it generated a lot of hype. The first two episodes were the best in my opinion because the first really brought us back up to speed where we see what Rick has been up to, and the first scene when he cuts his hand off, I mean, this was a pretty stupid scene looking back on it, and even kind of in the moment. The first episode helped flesh out what the CRM really was and what they've been up to. And it was hard because at first I didn't know where exactly this took place in the timeline, if it was before or after World Beyond, the spin-off show that came out a few years ago. There was 2 seasons of where it mainly focuses around the CRM and the greater Walking Dead universe. So I was wondering where this took place in that timeline, and now it's very clear towards the end, as the show wrapped up, it takes place after, which kind of puts us somewhere between the 13 to 15 year time gap that we're in from when this Walking Dead started to where we are now. You can kind of just measure it by Judith's age. The actress herself is 17, but I don't think Judith in the show is that old. I think she's more around 15, so that's kind of how far we're in. And we got to meet some cool characters like Okafor, Thorn, General Beale, just to name a few, and Esteban, who kind of gets forgotten about. I really liked seeing this darker side of Rick at first. It was really cool to see him kind of in this depressive, almost suicidal state of being beaten. We've seen him beaten before, most notably when Negan killed Glenn and Abraham, and how Rick kind of reacted to that. And honestly, it was not my favorite version of Rick, and it kind of was what started the spiral downhill of the show, of the original show. So we get a different version of that here because Rick's just mostly depressed and doesn't feel like he'll ever be able to get home. So he tries to, again, cut off his own hand. He holds a piece of glass to his throat. At one point, he even asked Okafor just to straight up shoot him in the head. Okafor believed in him, though, and Thorn. And Okafor was a cool character who is one of the higher ranking officers in the CRM, but he didn't agree with a lot of what the CRM was doing. And he's shown this in his backstory because when confronted with a situation that he didn't want to be a part of, he killed his entire Marine Corps, about 4,000 men and women, including his wife, when he bombed the stadium that they were hunkered down in. Unfortunately, Okafor dies at the end of the first episode. And it turned out Michonne's friend Nate is the one that killed him. So Michonne ended up meeting up with another group of nomad travelers, and she ends up only staying with them for a few days and then branches off on her own to go find Rick. Basically, then a few other people come with her. The husband and wife that she saved originally, I forgot their names and couldn't be bothered to look them up, and Nate, and a few other people. So on their way to try to find the CRM, I guess they get a little too close because they get mustard gas bombed somewhere on the road, just in the open, by a helicopter. And they're recovering from that for a year. I thought it was a few months, watching it live. And it wasn't until later in another episode where Michonne states that she was there for a year in this furniture store, basically. I didn't realize she was there for that long. So when she sees Rick, now it's even more years that she hasn't seen him. So what we're talking, 8 years maybe that she hasn't seen him, maybe more. So it's a really emotional moment and actually a really fun scene where the two of them kind of have to pretend that they don't know each other. Nate is unfortunately killed by one of the straggling soldiers, another character who I thought could have been kind of cool. But I honestly really liked the way he died. It really was an element of The Walking Dead that I feel like has been missing for a while. Just random deaths like Denise, for example, or something like that, just randomly just dropped in the open. So I thought it was actually really cool. I thought Nate served his purpose in the show. Now, the biggest problem with this show is the last episode. And not to skip over those next 3 episodes in the middle, it could basically summarize by Rick and Michonne trying to get back to Alexandria, and then Jadis basically finding them, and then they have to go back to the CRM after they kill Jadis to destroy the note, which was the one thing that prevented them from leaving in the first place. And around episode 3, they're like, screw it, we'll leave anyways, and they go back to destroy it nevertheless. So I thought that was a little bit of a waste of time. So the last episode, I figured if there was gonna be a season 2, we would see the footnotes for it here. Yeah, I don't see a season 2 happening. They killed Beale, they killed Thorn, the whole CRM military is dead, all the people are free, and everyone went home. And then, of course, the last episode was full of plot armor and conveniency as Rick takes out Beale and kind of sets off these bombs in this tent for what seems like at least a few minutes, maybe close to 30 or however long it took them to set these grenades. And no one walks in, no one sees them doing anything. And as they go home and reunite with their family, we have that really awkward scene with RJ. I'll start by saying that the actress who plays Judith is Casey Fleming, and she is phenomenal. She was really emotional and heartwarming in this scene. She had the brightest smile on her face when she saw Rick, and it really just kind of uplifted the scene that was riddled with poor dialogue. So good for her. I hope to see her in more shows soon, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the ending of the show with Rick and RJ meeting kind of overshadowed what was supposed to be a really sweet ending because the acting was tough, so was the delivery and the dialogue. Overall, it seemed like a scene that they were shooting at the end of the day. But I'm not gonna let that take away from the message that I was supposed to be reuniting with Rick's family in what could be one of the last times we ever see Rick's character. So that brings me to Dead City. Dead City had a great foundation for the show because Maggie and Negan's relationship is the most polarizing of any show I've ever seen. A show where a guy kills a woman's husband in front of her and somehow they become allies to defeat a greater enemy is so captivating. And Dead City started off in a town kind of almost like the Wild West, and basically Maggie is acting almost as if a bounty hunter looking for Negan, and we later find out that someone Negan used to know, the Croat, had taken Maggie's son, Herschel, and was holding him. So Maggie needs Negan's help to get him back. So this first episode did something that was really interesting to me, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it at the time, but now it kind of bothers me, and that was the flashback sequence, when Maggie was able to relive the moment where Negan killed Glenn. And to me, the purpose of this was to get us to kind of hate Negan again, because we spent basically the past 3 seasons of the main show and a total of about 5 to 6 years of real time kind of developing Negan and redeeming him. And he should have been redeemed in the last episode of The Walking Dead, and Maggie tells him that she can't forgive him. We kind of saw this coming because Dead City was announced before the show ended. We knew that there had to be ripples in their relationship still, and of course there always will be, but it had to be strong enough to carry another storyline. Which is kind of why this bothered me, because Negan should have been redeemed at this point. He has helped them fight in 2 wars against the Whisperers and the Commonwealth. He has helped save Judith multiple times. Him and Daryl were a great tag team. And overall, the moment where Negan killed Glenn in real time is now 7 years ago. So us as the audience watching this through real time, unless you're a new viewer, it's kind of over the fact that he killed Glenn. Like, it's so long ago at this point that it isn't really enough for us to hate him. And he hasn't really done anything else that would continue for us to hate him. Like, he's genuinely just been a good guy. So Dead City, we kind of just follow Negan and Maggie throughout their journey as they try to find the Croat. And then somewhere towards the end, in the last episode, Negan finds out that Maggie was actually not just teaming up with Negan, and that the Croat wanted Negan and held Herschel for ransom. So this was a cool twist, and now has put some of the Walking Dead fan base on the hate Maggie train, because we're all a little over her hating him. And realistically, it does make sense, but it's just not as entertaining or polarizing as it used to be, especially back in season 7 or 8, when one of the most emotional moments of the show came as Maggie's in tears when Rick decides to let Negan live. Somewhere after that point, I think as an audience, we kind of just got over it, or at least I did. And that kind of twist was almost a little disheartening, because now I just kind of feel bad for Negan. Maybe that's the point. So we'll see what happens in season 2. But overall, I think the show was fine at best. I love Jeffrey Dean Morgan's acting. I think the Croat was a really good character as well. They just gotta do something about cutting down on side characters. It feels like in all these shows, they're running into little side characters that never really feel like they serve the plot. They're just kind of there so our main characters have someone to talk to. Which brings me to the next show, Daryl Dixon. So Daryl Dixon might have been my favorite of the spin-offs, mainly because it felt like there wasn't as much wasted time. It felt like every episode was using its time efficiently, especially in the first few episodes as we really get to learn our characters. This is really the only show where it really takes a lot of time to show us the backstory of our characters. I know we had some Okafor flashbacks and we had some Croat flashbacks, or like one Croat flashback. But this, we really get flashbacks into Isabel's character, who's the co-star to Daryl Dixon, and who she is basically before the turn. And we actually see the moment, where the world goes to shit in France. And I think that's a really cool scene. I love these flashback scenes where we see the beginning of how it started for each person. It's really fascinating to me to see where characters come from, which is why I really like these scenes. So we see her as a former pill addict, basically. Also, she struggles with mental health.
health, but she has tried to kill herself before, and that's when her boyfriend saved her. So her boyfriend Quinn is throughout the first parts of the flashback as they both go to grab Isabel's sister and take off. But Isabel's sister is pregnant and likely won't make it. So Quinn is telling Isabel that they should just leave her behind or drop her off somewhere. And Isabel basically takes that kind of personally, obviously, and tricks Quinn to getting out of the car, and Isabel sneaks in the car with her sister still in it and drives off. And that's when they find the church, which helped give birth to her sister Lily's child. But unfortunately, Lily dies during childbirth and turns while the baby is still unborn. So they have to birth the child from a walker, which is actually insane. This was a crazy scene. So this child is now viewed as some godly messiah because it is the child who was born from death. And then Isabel takes her now nephew under her care and names him after Saint Laurent. Going in timeline order, you last saw Daryl going off to find Rick and makes his way all the way up from Georgia to Maine. And while in Maine, he runs out of gas. So some random person drives up to him, literally drives up to him and said, "Do you need work? We'll give you gas." So he ends up not getting along with some of the other workers. They probably killed another one of the workers who was a kid that looked up to Daryl. So Daryl fights them, and because of that, he gets imprisoned on a boat that is heading to France. This boat has a crew that is intending to throw its prisoners into zombie pits. So Daryl finds an opening and is able to get out with some of the other prisoners, including the one that killed the kid. And as Daryl's making his escape, the ship mostly blows up. Also, it was really cool that we saw a variant walker on this boat. It was a little different than the others. It kind of looked more hyper aggressive, more violent, faster, stronger. So when we got to France in the first episode, now going back, chronologically, so now Daryl ends up in France, we don't really see as many variant walkers as I thought we would have. Because at the end of World Beyond, they made it seem like there was more of these variant walkers and they were more common, and that's kind of just how they turned. But then in the show, we don't really see too many variant walkers. Most of the walkers we run into are just regular, slow, mindless zombies. So Daryl makes his way through France to try to help Laurent, bring him to this safe haven. Throughout that, the people who were running the boat, this French military, find out who he is and his name, and run into more people who don't like him, for better or worse, that also know that Daryl Dixon is traveling with this kid up to this safe haven. And at the end, one part that confused me is that the French militant, his name is Stefan, he has Daryl dead to rights on the ground with a gun to his head, and turns on the French military who helped him and lets Daryl go. And that's just that. So this show is confirmed to get a season 2, and we know that because Book of Carol is coming out this summer. So what I think is basically going to happen is that Carol realizes Rick returns and goes out to find Daryl, and somehow makes her way either to France or he makes his way back to her. But part of me feels like she's going to France. As of for the title of this video, what is next? So there has to be a solid foundation created somewhere in these spin-offs for a next generation of The Walking Dead, if there is going to be a next one. And yes, Judith should be the main focal point and somehow have herself either separated or a time skip to kind of create this new generation. If she's going to be the lead of the show, there can't be Daryl and Carol and Rick around, because as the audience, we're just going to kind of want to see them lead. The best way for a next generation to kind of work here is you have to find ways to write out the old characters. One of the things that the original Walking Dead show did that was so interesting is that our survivors would constantly run into people who either didn't know how to survive. So they'll have to find a way to add that kind of tension back into the show. So you could have it where the kids grow up for years and years and years and there's no issues, kind of like World Beyond, and then all of a sudden they're thrusted into the apocalypse. Even though they've kind of grown up in the apocalypse their entire life, they've been shielded from it for years. So that's how you can kind of create this new generation of people who don't know how to survive, who don't know what's going on, who don't know how to deal with problems, and Judith, being the experienced one, can lead them through that. One thing that has to change though is the way to view these shows. I know they're on cable still, and they averaged about 800,000 viewers per episode for the ones who lived, and 600,000 for Dead City, which kind of tells me the franchise is kind of solely surviving off the hardcore viewers, kind of like myself. I'm not the biggest fan of the franchise as I used to be, but I still watch it just to kind of keep up. To be honest, it's feeling a little bit like a chore at this point, because I just kind of want to see where my favorite characters ended up after spending years following them. So something AMC AMC has to do is if they're going to put shows on AMC Plus, they have to do something else to get them on Netflix or another streaming service. If you recall, some of the heights of this show was averaging around 15, sometimes up to 17 million viewers. There's only 11 million on AMC Plus altogether. So something needs to change where these shows can be viewed on Netflix as well if we want, this next generation of The Walking Dead to grow. Because I don't know how much longer this core cast is going to be able to carry this series, especially Rick, who I've talked about before, that I'm not sure if Andrew Lincoln's going to come back, at least anytime soon. The Ones Who Live did solve every major problem, and unless it's somehow the CRM returned, I don't know what the next season could hold, unless it has nothing to do with the CRM. I think we were lucky to get 6 episodes of Andrew Lincoln. His main reason for not coming back was to spend time with his family, because he's from the United Kingdom, and he had to come here for months at a time to film the 16 episode seasons. So far, I expect the Book of Carol for her to go on her adventure, find 1 or 2 friendly people to help her get to where she needs to go, and in the last episode, reunite with Daryl. If they reunite in the United States, then that'll make things a lot easier. So currently, it seems we're about 15 years, give or take, into the apocalypse, and I think Maggie and Negan are the farthest ahead, so maybe Carol's travels out to Daryl in France, or again, back here in the United States, will somehow even out that time skip. So let me know what you want to see in the next generation of The Walking Dead, whether it's going to be a new show with new characters or somehow Judith will lead the franchise into the next generation. So let me know what you're looking forward to in this next generation of The Walking Dead.